Hi everyone. In our last session, we saw that how the data flows into IVP in a demand planning process. So just to reiterate, this is for illustration purpose. Yeah, there might be some more key figures here and there in the planning process, but I tried to bring in the main key figures that we use in the demand planning process. So, for example, the data once it is loaded into IVP from an external system. One of the key figures is LCS to initial. So, for example, we are looking at the product customer combination and the sales is 1580 and it gets cleaned and it becomes 1474 because some outliers are corrected. And there might be some cuts and cancellations. So 1474 plus we have some cancellations of 1479. So this sales history final key figure becomes the basis on which the statistical forecast algorithm runs. It stores the forecast data into the statistical forecast quantity key figure. Now it just generated some statistical forecast quantity which gets copied to the consensus demand key figure through a copy operator. So these are the same values. And then there might be some promotions and incremental demand which the demand planners can use to add on to the consensus demand. So 1969 plus 11 plus 9 is 1989, which is stored in the consensus demand final key figure. And the consensus demand final key figure are typically written in such a way that if the planner decides to override all these values, then he just puts some value and that value is copied to the consensus demand final. But if there is no value in the override, then it is a sum of all these values. Now the consensus demand final is copied to the unconstrained demand, which becomes the handshake demand finally given to the supply team from the demand planning team. What we see is that the values in the consensus demand is more or less same as the unconstrained demand because this gets copied, the consensus demand final key figure gets copied to the unconstrained demand through a copy operator. And then there might be some demand from other geographies which gets added to the handshake demand. So final key figure is handshake demand, which is passed on to supply. So let's see how it looks in the IBP interface. So this is the IBP planning view where we have the product, we have the key figures, and we have the key figure values over here. And we are looking at the data at a month level. So what we are having is here is all the historical value based on which the stat forecast has generated some quantity, and then also the enrichment has happened based on the inputs from marketing team, the category team, all the demand planners own insights. So this sales history gets as finally to the supply team as a forecast value. So what happens is that the sales history initial as we receive gets cleansed, and then the cuts and cancellations, if any, gets added to the cleansed data to become the sales history final. And this is used to generate the algorithm. So the statistical forecast quantity has generated for the future months. The consensus demand copies the data from the statistical forecast quantity through a copy operator. And then there might be some incremental demand and promotions which the planners can maintain or they can override. So how this works is that if you sum this up, this is 1915, but this is 1870 because there is a override key value that the planner has maintained. However, this value in the consensus demand final is same as this value because there is no override. Again, this value is the sum of 1971 for August and 1971, but since there is no override, but as soon as there is some override, this override key figure is the final key figure of the consensus demand final. Now the consensus demand final is copied to the unconstrained demand through a copy operator, which gets added to some demand of other geographies to become the final handshake demand, which is passed on to supply team. So here you can see that this is a single view of the IBP Excel interface where all the planners gets the visibility into all the key figures, all the data. And if they make any changes, it will reflect immediately to some other planners planning view. They will be able to also look at this data and understand how the data has transformed, and they will make their own operational work on this planning view. So let's see how the IVP, how to generate this report. So we log into IVP, and this is the window on which we can choose the period for which we want to look at the data. So we can look at the data by day, month, technical week, quarter, year. We can choose the start and end date. We can look at the attributes. For an example, we do the product ID. We can look at the data ID, product ID, customer ID, location ID also. And then these are the key figures. So we have seen all the key figures in our report. So these are all the key figures, right? So these are all the key figures that we bring in from this figure tab. We can filter the data. So we are filtering it by the product that we are looking at. We can also add in multiple filters over here to restrict the report through a particular location or a customer. We have some versions which we can choose. We can also choose the scenario data that we want to look at. And then we click on OK. And we get this planning view. So this is how the Excel interface of IVP looks.